Welcome to the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast. Today we have Alex Barr and Kaytlin Brown, who are birth educators with Dare to Birth. Dare to Birth is a local group that offers birth education and preparation courses, but they also have virtual services. I wanted to have them on today so they could share their wealth of information regarding the birth process, as well as postpartum and coming home with a baby. In this episode, we're going to talk about the physical, mindset, and nutritional things that we need to do to prepare for birth, but also the common myths and misconceptions that you see in the different settings. These girls are full of a wealth of information and are here to empower you. So join me as I welcome Alex and Kaytlin to our podcast. So please introduce yourselves, girls, and give us a little tidbit about yourself. And that way our audience can get to know you before we go into this. So Alex, why don't you start first?
Okay, I'm Alex Barr. I'm the founder of Dare to Birth, which is a childbirth education business. So we teach new families and expecting families how to prepare for the end of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. I'm also a birth doula, and I've been a doula since 2020.
Awesome. And Kaytlin, what about you?
Awesome. So I'm Kaytlin Brown, and I am an educator with Dare to Birth, but I also own my own massage and doula practice called Asher Birth and Body. So I help people at the end of pregnancy, especially through Dare to Birth, just prepare their mind and body and get ready for the big transformation that is becoming a parent.
I know both of you all through our interactions, like on networking and just meeting with you guys and being a referral source to and from y'all. And one thing that I've noticed with my clients and just with the general population is just this, like, I'll figure out labor. Like, women tend to have this idea of what they think it'll be like. And then I get them on the other side and they're like, yeah, that's not what happened at all. It didn't go how I wanted it. And what I want you two to touch on is, why do you think just even the education of going through labor and birth itself is so important rather than this, I'll figure it out during labor?
I think that the big reason why people think they can figure it out is a lot of the narrative is like, we've been doing this forever. And like, everybody's had a baby, essentially. And so it's a lot of this, like, it'll be fine. Or like, I know plenty of people who've had babies, and without understanding like how wildly different experiences can happen or all the crazy ways birth can go. And I think that's part of why like people are like, oh, I'll just figure it out,
Yeah, I think there's also just like a massive trust in the way that birth is put forth, especially in like our country. And I think that people just assume that everything will be wonderful, which most of the time it is, right? But I think people need to understand, like, the reason it's so crucial is because information is power, really. And even more so in the birth space, like information about what the hell is going on with your body and how to work with it and understand it. And if you can understand that, then you can really just approach things in a different way.
It's interesting because I'm hearing y'all say essentially like give women the choice for birth. And that's a lot of what I coach is like, if you're going to choose to have like the cake, make the choice to have the cake rather than be like, oops, I had the cake. And what I hear you guys saying, and what I know you all say, is make the choice to go and choose this hospital or this doctor or this like environment that you want, as opposed to just winding up there. So
absolutely, we're like really trained to like trust in the system. Like, oh yeah, we'll just go to the hospital and everything will be taken care of, right? And in the same hospital, you have wildly different practices who have wildly different statistics and practice so differently. And not enough people know that they can make a different choice, or they can shop for a doctor, or they can like find the right person. Or if they are shopping for a doctor or trying to find the right person, they don't necessarily know the questions to ask or how to find somebody that aligns with what they think is important,
I think that's a good point. Yeah. So finding out that one of the myths and misconceptions of birth is that you have to go to this hospital, you have to see this doctor. If you've been with this OBGYN who did your UTI and your sex education and all of that, then they're the best one for birth for you. What are some other like myths and misconceptions that you find that women have, or even families have, about birth and birth preparation?
Good question.
I think a lot of people just take other people's stories and experiences and try to utilize them to go through their journey. And not that there's anything wrong with like listening to things that have happened to other people. But I think that people lean on that, and just kind of what Alex said earlier is like, people have been doing this for years. My body can do this. I know, I'm just going to go with the flow, whatever they say. But I think that they don't necessarily think about taking like the power and the control into their own hands, and like understanding their choices, and like really making it what they deserve it to be. Like, I think people don't understand like that you can actually ask for certain things or say no to certain things. And with childbirth education, like that's where that understanding comes from. And a lot of people that take our classes are like, I didn't know that I could say no to having an IV or something like that. Right. And so I think just like empowerment in care, and empowering people to like really go for what they want and what they desire and what they deserve, versus just kind of going with the flow and getting whatever it is that they get, which could be great or could be not. Right. So I think that's a big misconception.
What do you tend to see the flow as? Like, what do you mean by that of flow? And like, what, I guess the question is, what I am hearing from y'all is there's kind of this process of that people think birth goes, and it tends to play out a certain way in hospitals. I want you to like elaborate on what some of those decisions are along the way that they can choose. So for example, you brought up, they might not they don't have to have an IV. Right. And so what are some other choices along the way of like kind of that birth journey, I guess, or giving birth journey, that you see that people have a choice with that they don't know that they do?
Well, first I would say to give birth not in the hospital, right? To give birth at home or a birth center. That's one of the big ones that people are like, oh, I had no idea I could do that. Or I'm over 35, so I didn't know I could do that. Or, insert whatever, quote unquote risk factor here. Oh, I didn't even know I could look into that option. That's the first one I see.
It's funny you say that. Yeah.
Secondly, I would say like provider, and you hit on this already, Amanda, but like, I've just seen this, I've had this OB for my whole life, and so that's just who I'm going to go with. And sometimes going through a class or talking to other people kind of can invite the possibility that like, oh, maybe this isn't actually the right person for me, and it is okay to like look elsewhere. I had a client once who switched providers at like 28 weeks, and she actually landed on her final provider at 28 weeks. So it was really empowering to see someone say like, no, that's not the right person, this isn't the right person, oh, this is the right practice. And I think people just, when they go with the flow, they just kind of jump in and say, I'm going to go with this doctor that I've known. And that's just who we are as human beings, right? We like to go with what's comfortable and what's easy, but I'm going to go with this doctor who I know, and this is where they deliver. So that's where I'm going to be. And I'm afraid of XYZ. So I have a low pain tolerance. So I'm going to get an epidural, and I'm just going to do it this way. And I think it's easy for that to happen because birth's so medicalized in the US, but I think just like opening people's eyes to the choices that they actually have, even if they go through and understand and learned and make an informed choice to do all those things, it's even more empowering, right? Instead of just going with
and that's what we want. And those two things of where to birth and who to birth with are like those big foundational choices that set you up for a lot of things, right? It can send you on a trajectory for like a very medicalized birth or a very not medicalized birth, right? And that's what's hard, is sometimes we meet people a little later in their pregnancy where they're like, I don't know, so that's where we focus a lot about, because they don't know if they want to switch providers later in pregnancy, right? If we see people like in their last trimester a lot of times. And so that's why we focus a lot about like, okay, this is your provider. This is where you're giving birth. How do you advocate for yourself? How do you speak up? How do you ask questions so you get information to decide what you want to do, right? And decide if you want to go with the flow of the hospital, right? Because hospitals if we're talking about hospitals, they definitely have like a system. They have their policies. They have the way they typically do things. So a lot of people don't know that they can't be like, oh, actually, I don't want that. I don't want an IV. I don't want an epidural, or I don't want to be continuously monitored because I want to be able to move around or have more freedom of movement and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting y'all bring that up because ironically, I had a conversation with somebody last week and I thought, I need to put this in my head for when I talk to them. Is because I was talking with her and she's like, yeah, we started hospital tours and very excited, but some of the hospitals, they only allow X amount of visitors and they wanted a bit more. And she's like, and then she was disappointed that the birth room isn't necessarily the postpartum room and that you switch between triage birth room to postpartum room. And then she was upset about a couple other things. She's like, I just really wanted like that natural birth experience. And so I texted her back and I was like, dude, you want a birth center? Like, and she was like, oh, I guess I do. And I said, yeah. And she's like, well, I'm going to check out these other hospitals. I was like, well, does your provider have rights at those other hospitals though, too? And she's like, oh, I don't even know. And so I was like, okay, like this is important, like for you to know of what are your expectations. Like, do you want a bunch of family in the room, because a hospital might not allow that, especially depending on the time of year that you're going to deliver. If you want like this like natural kind of dark ambiance that's a little bit more moody and vibey or whatever, then the hospital might not have that for you with the overhead lights and the people coming
or
in.
you have to work really hard to make the vibe right in a hospital room. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like bring all your tools. Whereas if you just go into a birth center, they might have all of that there, and it might be more comfortable or even at home, like the comfort of your home. So I found that really interesting. I was like, oh man. And I thought it was a good like topic to bring into this. So when we're talking about the myths and misconceptions of birth. Now, when you are seeing someone, okay, they go, you know what, I'm going to get the education. I'm going to choose this provider. If I am going to go to the hospital, it's going to be this one, or maybe I am going to do a birth center, or maybe I'm going to do it at home. How does that informed choice from that client change the outcomes of their labor, either with them physically and mentally? Like, what do you guys tend to see on your end of that person's evolution mentally and physically?
I think I see that they're just really empowered. Like, as long as you feel like you're making the right choice for you because you have asked questions and you've gotten answers that make you choose one way or the other, like an epidural, for example, maybe you're going in with like the thought of an unmedicated birth, and then you kind of hit like your threshold and you go through like what it would look like to even get an epidural and how long does it take and what does the process look like. Ideally, you've learned that before, but and then you say like, okay, you know what? Actually, I think this is the right thing for me. Ideally, when you make an informed choice like that, with that understanding, like when you come out on the other side of it, you go like, I feel really good about how everything went because I understood it. Nothing was forced on me. Nothing was pushed on me. I was listened to. I was given information so that when it came down to like making a decision on something, you could do so with like confidence. And I think that's one of the biggest things that comes with being informed is confidence in yourself and what you want.
Yeah, we talk a lot about being like we can't necessarily change outcomes or like know that we change outcomes, but we can definitely change the outlook, right? So how did we feel about our birth? Was it traumatizing? Were we listened to, right? And then also there's added information, right? So like when we talk about epidurals in class, we're like, if you want an epidural, that's fine, right? If you decide that's right, but here's some tips for it, right? Why don't we typically like to wait till at least 6 centimeters to get an epidural, or once you have an epidural, you still need to move, right? You still need to flip and flop and do all the movement that you would be doing if you didn't have an epidural. Or we talk to people about kind of sometimes epidurals don't work, and then what do we do in that situation, right? So kind of removing some of the scariness from some of these interventions can be helpful, but also there's just less surprise, right? So if someone's taking our class and they're getting an epidural, they're not like being confronted with that in labor of like, these are the steps of an epidural and this is what we're saying yes to. So it just allows them to make what I hope is a more confident choice of like, yes, I want this, or no, I don't, right?
I think it's really important that y'all in your course and classes that you do offer like both sides, right? Because sometimes I'll see from my perspective is like, and this is not a knock on anything, but like more earthy where they don't even address like, if you get to this point, here is the trade-off, the education of an epidural, right? Or you go to like a hospital course and they're like, at 8:52, all of our women get an epidural, or something like that. And so I find that's really important that you two blend everything and give them the option to choose, where you may say, yeah, I'm going to do an epidural, and that's okay.
I interrupt this episode to bring you information on our Sprinkling Your Mindset Masterclass here at the Mindset of Matter. The masterclass will be on March 25th, and it will be covering all of the things we talk about here at the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast, and have you gaining understanding around your behaviors, your yo-yo dieting, your restricting and binging, you're starting over again on Monday. On top of that, you will get a $10 early bird discount to sign up for our 21-day food and body freedom challenge. This is a challenge that is a mini mindset method on top of receiving nutrition and exercise guidance. This is a taste of what we do here at the Mindset of Matter, and you'll receive our 21-day challenge at $29 if you sign up between now and our masterclass on March 25th. So I hope to see all of you both in the masterclass and in our 21-day challenge. Now, back to the show.
How would
that's
you
literally why I started, why I made my own curriculum originally, is I saw a lot of very opposite ends. And as I went to more births and saw more births happen, I realized that there was no middle ground of how do I maybe I want the most unmedicated as possible, but then a lot of courses will kind of talk about it in a scary way of be very afraid of these things, rather than how do I make an informed choice to decide that's right for us, right? Because it's all risk analysis, right? We're always deciding is the risks worth the benefits for ourselves all the time, right? But especially in pregnancy, and you're going to be doing that for your kid pretty soon after you give birth, right? So that's what I found was missing. And a lot of the work I put into the classes was to kind of find that middle ground of removing the shame, removing the guilt, right? I can't tell you how many people I've heard be I feel terrible that I made this decision, or I failed at my unmedicated birth, right? There's so much negativity and shame around it. We don't need that, right? We can leave that behind. But a lot of the messaging I see, especially when it's very much oh, everybody gets an epidural and it's great, or it's be very afraid of an epidural,
Yeah. That's one of the biggest reasons why I said yes to being an educator with Dare to Birth is two reasons. I always wanted to create my own, and I was I love Alex, and she created this, and it's way better than anything I would probably create. And then number two is that, people go into birth and they're planning and they're I don't want to say tunnel vision, but we all have this path we want to drive down, right? Ideally we want to have an unmedicated birth, right? But I love how the Dare to Birth curriculum teaches you about all the other possible turns you could make in that journey. And I think it's a really, and you could probably speak more to this from your psychology background, Amanda, but almost pre-processing of okay, well, if we turn down this road and I have an induction, what does that look like, right? What are questions I can ask around an induction? How might it work? Same with an epidural, so that in the moment when they are faced with possibly making those turns, they're oh yeah, I learned about this. It's not as scary right now because I understand, I know what questions to ask, and then I can say really confidently which direction I want to go, or at least just not be as scared of it. Like Alex said, I think taking away that fear is a really big role that education plays.
I'm glad you brought that up. So let me put this in a reference that some of the audience might be able to relate to. Is us three are going to, we plan to get pizza today, and I've got it logged. I know exactly what I'm going to have to stay within my goals. And then Alex decides I've actually heard of this really good Chinese food place. And Kaytlin goes, yes, that sounds great. And I go, oh, fuck. But I've already worked with somebody, i.e. birth educator, i.e. coach, that has walked me through of how to look at a menu unexpectedly and to make the decision that aligns with what I am looking for, within staying within my goals, but understanding that goals are an outline, but the choices to reach that goal can be flexible. So I want to let's bring it back to how we do that, and so focus on that. And actually circling back too, is y'all had mentioned that with an epidural, we still want to be moving. And a lot of people think I just get an epidural, I lay there, great. And then we see the kind of cascade that brings.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other movements that y'all recommend, whether it's going into labor, pregnancy, or even through labor, postpartum, that like more physical that you have your clients do?
Like to prepare, or when they're in labor?
All of the above.
I think like to prepare, one of the biggest things we talk about is doing things that are going to encourage like opening of your pelvis. And then really making sure that you're like doing equal things. So if you're doing a lot of like lunges or something, like you want to keep your pelvis even.
Balanced. Yeah.
Balance. Thank you. I was like, what's the word? So you want to do it like on both sides. But also like, I think things that are going to be really gentle on your body, especially at the end of pregnancy, is really important to try to get like your body into that like
down regulation.
Relaxed. Yeah, exactly. Like doing like great like exercises like you did through your whole pregnancy, Amanda, is amazing because your body was used to it, right? But it can also be stressful. So I feel like helping people to understand, like, regardless of what your routine was throughout your whole pregnancy, like towards the end, when you're like really preparing for labor, it's important to like bring the zen, like calm it down a little bit and get really like your mind and your body in touch with each other.
Yeah. And at the end of pregnancy, I'm usually just encouraging people to keep moving because in those last couple of weeks, people kind of just like sit down and I'm like, we should swim or walk or even doing like some gentle yoga because we do want to keep moving our body to prepare for this very physical experience we're going to have. Right. So I am usually encouraging, like, it doesn't matter what it is, just like keep moving your body as much as you can. Right. And then during labor, you know, I personally utilize a lot of spinning babies, which is, for anybody who doesn't know, is like essentially a methodology of different positions to put yourself in during labor. They also have some prenatal stuff, but I use a lot of it in labor, depending on where baby's at. So if baby's up higher in the pelvis, we're going to do things to engage baby in the pelvis. If baby's lower in the pelvis, we're going to do things to open certain parts of the pelvis. Kind of moving throughout labor is so important, and most people don't do it. Most people are like, they don't know what to do, they don't know how to move, or it's kind of like, well, I see people give birth in the bed, so I'm gonna go lay down, which fair. It's fair to want to lay down, but that movement will help shorten your labor. It will help move baby through the pelvis easier. It can help. It's a huge comfort measure, right? So when contractions are intense and movement can help so much, right? Finding the right position, opening the pelvis up in the right way can make such a difference that I'm like, come on, let's go, let's walk, let's move, right?
I've had clients who are like, this just feels better. Like they'll try like sitting down or laying down for like a couple contractions and they're like, this is awful. I'm just like sitting here. I always say kind of like, if you're while you're unmedicated, you should move as much as you can, because if you're just laying there, then you're kind of just letting it happen to you instead of playing like an active role in helping and working with baby in your body. So like, let's walk, let's do some squats. Even if you're just standing there swaying back and forth, like that's still movement. And then if you choose to have an epidural, like there's still plenty of things you can do, right? We do a lot of like side lying with the peanut ball in different positions that associate to different like parts of the pelvis opening. But also depending on how strong your epidural is or how your body reacts to it, most of the time you're still going to have movement in your legs. It's just not safe to walk, right? So like you could be on all fours and like rocking back into like a squat position, or even like kneeling with like the squat bar on the bed. Like I think there's a misconception around epidurals and that you're just like done moving after that, but it's not true. I mean, doulas and nurses work really hard to like make sure that you're still moving. Unless you need to rest, then it's like active rest on your side with a peanut ball. Yeah.
So for example, during my birth, for some of the listeners here have been through with me, like through pregnancy and everything. So with my birth, when I got the, the cervical ripening stuff, with that, once I could get up and walk, I was walking around the floor. Essentially, I would do a laps and then I was doing squats and just kind of keep moving. But I wasn't doing it with the intention of like, well, I didn't work out today, so I'm going to get my workout in. It was more so of like, I'm going to keep moving because this is going to feel good. but I also need to monitor how much like energy expenditure I'm doing because I'm about to go into a huge energy push. And then once I got the balloon, I was up and moving and kind of I swayed a lot. That was just what worked for me. It just felt good. And I think it wasn't even like I was like, I'm going to sway. That feels good. It was just what my body was carrying me into. And then once I got the Pitocin, that was just swaying and kind of honestly moving around the bed as much as I could. And then I eventually somehow got on my side. I have no idea how. But even the nurses were like, can you flip to the other side? And it was like, okay, like 1, 2, 3, flip, just getting me through it. But like there was movement through each kind of induction piece that I had, but each process of the labor. And then even before, like Alex, I think it was really important that you were talking about that, of finding movement that works for you going into it without spending, again, a lot of energy, because you're about to go into something that requires hours potentially of your body pushing or just moving something through you. And I think a lot of women don't understand that yes, it is a natural process. And I'm not meaning this in any way that is, offensive or harmful, but yes, it is a natural process, but there is a beauty to preparing your body to that process and connecting with it. When, like, say we're swimming throughout pregnancy, like, can I hold it a little bit longer and just see if I can kind of push myself on that edge without being like gassed, right? Yeah. Because that ability to go through and kind of give that push and be able to come back and relax and center yourself was really important for me, at least during the contractions, of being able to push and then go, okay, I need a break. We got to settle down, regroup. And now here we go again.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that y'all touch on that and brought that up. And then also coincidentally going into that is the nutrition piece of it, right? We want to eat, and that's going back to the myths and misconceptions of you can't eat if you get an epidural, you can't eat if you're in labor. I'll tell you right now, I ate when I could, right? Sometimes you're just like, I can't eat right now. Like, this is not even on my mind. Yeah. But when I was in I would say a sound state, I was definitely shoving a breakfast burrito down my throat.
And we encourage people to eat in labor.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a choice that they get to make, but there is a lot of evidence that supports that. That some of the risks are lower than people make them sound sometimes. So we encourage people to look into the evidence to decide that. But we really encourage, in early labor, you eat as decent of a meal as you can. And then
can I pause you? What would be considered early labor for those listening?
Okay, so early labor is just when our contractions kind of just start, right? Maybe they're inconsistent, maybe they're all over the place. I have a contraction every 5 minutes and then 8 minutes and then 12 minutes, right? Okay. Just those really early times of labor. A lot of times people get super excited when those contractions start and they run around their house and they do all these things. So we encourage people to eat something good, because as you move further through labor, you're probably going to be less likely to want to eat. Yes. So even if you are hungry, it's going to be maybe a granola bar or honey sticks or applesauces, right? People are going to sometimes get really nauseous. It's just harder to eat, I think, as you get further into labor. And we encourage people to rest in that time because, because especially when we're trying to induce labor or pick labor up, people are let's run around the block. Let's do so much, right? Without realizing that this could be a long process, right? Okay. It could be, especially if it's our first baby, sometimes that's 24 plus hours that we're in early labor, right? So we can be in labor for a while, and people underutilize that rest, especially early on, I think. Because they're excited. They're let's pack the hospital bag. Let's do all the things,
Kaytlin, Alex mentioned some foods to have, the honey sticks, the granola bars. Are there any treats that you always recommend to your clients?
Those are some big ones. Sometimes I say if you have a favorite protein shake, or even a a bottled, already bottled one that's just easier to bring with you, right? You don't have to bring powder and stuff to mix with it. But sometimes that's easier to get down some quick energy and quick honestly calories and protein to energize yourself, and it's less chewing and
it's less effort.
Yeah, our body, we know we need the fuel, but when we're especially getting into active labor, generally people just don't want to eat, which is fine, but you still need energy, right? So if you can take a couple big gulps of like a protein shake or eat a honey stick. Other things I like are like jerky, or like meat sticks, like anything that's like a quick, like easy hit of protein to help fuel your body. And then sometimes even just like a juice, a juice from the hospital fridge, right? Like that can sometimes even be, or broth, like bringing broth with you is an easy thing to do too. So just those things that you know are going to have like good nutrients for your body to help fuel it. Or also just something you know that you like to eat. Like I had like a giant Tupperware of watermelon when I was in labor, because I don't think I ate any of it because I didn't want to, but that's what, like, I ate so much watermelon when I was pregnant because it was hot and I just wanted cold watermelon all of the time. And so I was like, we're bringing that with, and I didn't eat any of it during labor, but like something that you know that you can easily eat, that you like, that you haven't been like turned off to.
Hello, listeners. We have the Mindset of Mommies program coming out March 3rd. In this group coaching program, you're going to get 8 weeks of foundational topics to give you the best pregnancy yet. This is for people who are interested in getting pregnant, who are currently trying to conceive, or if you're pregnant, and that could be your first pregnancy or your fifth pregnancy. In this 8-week series, what we're going to do is take you through weekly topics that focus on adjustments for pregnancy. So for example, how to adjust your exercise training through each trimester, which nutrition considerations you need to implement into your diet and lifestyle. What mindset shifts do you need to make through your body image, gaining weight, as well as your relationships? What support services should you seek? Do we need a pelvic floor physical therapist, chiropractor, massage, all the goods and ends? Also, resources. I've got a full Google Drive of resources for you to have access to. We'll also have weekly group calls. On these weekly group calls, they are recorded, so you have a lifetime of access to reference them. So if this is something you're interested in, again, we're starting March 3rd. Be sure to sign up in the link below, and let's get you started for the best pregnancy yet.
Yeah, that's why I think I recommend some like liquid options. Broth is good, even like an electrolyte drink. Like, because sometimes people aren't going to keep down any food.
No.
So having that as an option is a good idea.
We got Chick-fil-A. I got some soup and I threw it up. So
yeah.
I do sometimes mention that to people, like a decent amount of people will vomit during labor. Yeah. So like you can also take that into account. Like, what do you not want coming up later?
What's going to throw up the best?
I did barf through my entire labor.
There,
golly, see? That's awful.
So, okay. Well, speaking of,
that's a personal anecdote. Sorry.
Yeah, there's lots of personals here. So when we're talking about food and whatnot, and I think this will be interesting from y'all coming from this doula perspective of supporting people while they're in labor, is how does the doula or maybe the person's support person or spouse help make sure that birthing person is getting the nutrition?
I think really I'm personally like, that's not going to be something that I'm like super specialized in outside of recommending that people connect with, like if it's something that's important to them, which it should be, like connecting with someone who could help them figure out what's going to fuel their body the best throughout pregnancy and then throughout labor. And then, I love a good meal prep, like talking to people about things that they can prep for their body. I just have like books that I recommend to people, or even like Instagram accounts that are like good in terms of like sharing easy ways to prepare like freezer meals for yourself throughout pregnancy, so that you're set up in postpartum, and then figuring out what it is that your support people can like have with them. I try to always have honey sticks in my bag. Like I'm not probably gonna not pack like full blown snacks for my client. I pack them for myself and I will share them, but like but just encouraging them to like put things that they know that they're gonna love to eat or possibly eat in the space, and just have like a bag of snacks.
And the support team can just like recommend, like, hey, do you want a snack? Hey, do you want some water? Do you want, right? Like, just giving it as an option. That's usually what I do. That way they can be like, no, don't do that. I don't want that. Right. Or they can be like, yeah, that's great.
That's what, for me, Michael would be like, I'm going to get you water, drink this. And I'd be like, okay. And he's like, I'm going to get you applesauce here, try. And I'd be like, okay. So for me, it was more so of like, here, offer, do you want it? And I'd eat it and then be like, no, be like, okay, then that's fine. We'll move on.
Yeah. And that's what I do with a lot of things. I'm like, do you want to get up and walk around? Can we try some position changes? Or, this is what I'm seeing. It seems like maybe baby's in a funky position. Can we do some things that you're going to think are weird and help baby move?
So going into the mental aspect of this, so we've done physical, nutritional. What are some ways that y'all recommend someone mentally prepare for birth as much as they can? I mean, it is what it is at some point when you get there.
Yeah.
But what does it look like leading up to it?
I will say that I think that most people are not mentally prepared.
I would agree.
I would say that especially what I find the people who are like, they are so physically prepared. They're doing all the movement. They're doing all the things. The nutrition's on point, right? They have the doula. They have all the things, but they haven't really prepared mentally. I see a big like gap there.
What would you want mental preparation to look like for that type of person?
So I first love education, obviously. That's what we're talking about all the time, right? So education is the number one. Number two is I really encourage something to tap into your intuition, right? Okay. And that can look different for everybody, right? That can be meditation, or that could be, you know, like women's circles, or that could be, there's so many options, right? Journaling, all of that kind of stuff. But a lot of people are out of touch with that. Like, it's hard to tap into that. We ignore our bodies a lot. So it's something I talk a lot about is how do we find what's right for us? Right? What feels right in the moment? You were talking about your birth, right? You're swaying, you're squatting, right? Those things weren't necessarily things that you were like, okay, it's time to squat now. It felt good in your body and you listened to your body. And I see people put themselves in the exact position that I would take or I would suggest, right? The spinning babies move the position I was going to suggest, they already put themselves in it or a version of it. And when I see people tap into that, tap into themselves, I see them make different decisions, right? They move their body differently. They ask a little bit more for what they need, right? They're speaking up a little bit more of like, this feels good or this doesn't feel good. And all of that's going to have a positive impact on your labor and your life probably, right?
Yeah.
But that's one of the big things that I see like over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Kaytlin,
I think also, I think also like, along the education lines of like specifically something that we talk about is like actual like physiological birth and like the stages of labor and what they all look like and what they might feel like and then ways to work through them. I think when people aren't mentally prepared for what labor feels like, it can be really scary. And it can be like very overwhelming. But I think if you kind of like insert the understanding of like, well, here's what I'm actually feeling, right? Is like, this is active labor, right? And I know that because I chose to have a cervical exam and this is where I'm at and I can't talk through my contractions, but I'm really just, I think understanding like what is actually happening to their body can be really empowering to help like with the mindset in the moment. And that's maybe not actually like, I mean, the education is preparing, but I think just like having an actual understanding of what's going on and what the heck you're doing can be really empowering mentally in the birth space because you know what's going on. So then you can figure out how to best support your body and your mind through it. And it also helps you, I think, tap into that intuition even more. Like Alex said, is like, if you understand like the process of birth, then you can be like, oh, this is what's happening. And then you get even more in tune with like what you're feeling and what works to help make it feel better and work through those things. So I think that's like education is, I think, underplayed a lot in terms of mental preparation for birth.
Yeah, it's interesting y'all say that. So what I ended up doing was making like a cheat sheet of like early labor, transition, like active labor. This is things to expect and feelings and like kind of like your medical guidance of it, like X centimeters dilated, or like prepare for bloody show here or something like that. And then I put in the chart like movement that supports that phase.
Cute.
Now,
I love that. Yeah.
It was handy when I was like comprehensive or like, you know, like within my body, but it was nice to kind of see like, oh, I'm still at this phase. Maybe here are some signs to look out for to see if I'm moving on. And it also let me know like here, when I get to X point, this is what I can expect. Now, it may not be exact for me, but here's kind of like your general idea of what's going to happen or what can happen. And that was really helpful. But that also came from education of labor, right, and pregnancy. So yeah, I highly encourage, I mean, if anybody is listening that hasn't decided yet, like, you need to get the education for this.
Yeah.
Because like we said in the beginning, so many of our clients have come out on the other side, or we've, especially for y'all, you have met with second time birth people, third time people who didn't have a doula or birth education before. And they want to do this next time differently because of what happened. They don't want the same maybe trauma or experience or negative thoughts, feelings, emotions, and anything like that. So the mental aspect of preparing for it. And I think, Alex, you said it perfectly. They'll have their physical stuff done. They'll have their nutrition stuff, but yet they get there and they go, oh, fuck. Like, I'm not, and especially not being connected to your body and realizing like, okay, this is just feels good. And like taking that moment and calm and be like, what would feel good right now? Okay, maybe it is swaying. I need to just do that. But then it goes into the education of you can advocate for yourself, right? You can say, I'm going to get up out of this bed and I need to sway. And that's just what's going to feel good.
Yeah. And I think the intensity of birth really shocks people a lot. It shocks their partners and their support team too, as well as like what is going on. So I think that the education helps with that of like, this is an intense experience. This is not nothing. And
it's not the movies.
Yes, it's definitely not, right? It is an intense experience. It is an experience where you will be like kind of opened up a lot, right? Like you are going through this big experience. But I had a midwife tell me once, like, I mean, you're choosing to give birth. You're not choosing to have a not experience. Like this is part of the experience, right? And I tell my classes that all the time, like this is an experience and we're going to go through it. And the mindset will help you postpartum as well. There's a lot of transition, especially if it's your first baby, into becoming a parent. And I think people forget about that. So we talk a lot about that in our classes of like, what does postpartum look like? And have you all talked about parenting and how you want to parent? And most of the time the answer is like, well, no, I haven't really thought of that. So again, it's almost like another way for us to bring it to figure out what you want and what works well for you rather than just reacting to the next thing kind of thing is what we encourage a lot.
Question on that, because we're talking about staying calm and confident and having the education. Say either the person has all these things or not, but things start to get unpredictable in birth, or it starts to get a little chaotic. What is a tool that y'all have to like kind of recenter the situation, if any?
I like to talk about like keeping like being a unit, like a team. So like myself, the partner, and the birthing person, like there's always time to take time, just the three of us, and to like recoup, right? But if it's a more like intense situation that just kind of happened, I think the environment can shift so drastically in like a really anxious feeling sort of way. So being able to make eye contact with the person who's in labor and say like, just be right here. Like whether it's with myself or with their partner, and say like, we have to come back into like the moment that we're in and get like, stay in your body. We'll address what's happening around you in a calm way, but we need to come back into yourself really quick. Cause I think people can get really like, when things go unpredictably, people can get like really pulled out of themselves, and that's going to shift how your labor is actually going and happening. Right. So if we can get people to take like those deep breaths, like those cleansing breaths, and make eye contact with someone who can calm them, or maybe they need to like pick out some objects in the room to like bring them back to center. I think that's one of the biggest things that I talk about and that I try to do in this space, is that you just have to be able to like find your calm within yourself first, so that you can address like what's happening, or so that your partner can address what's happening around you, and you can make a really good decision moving forward out of like confidence, and not out of like everyone's running around saying XYZ has to happen, so I'm just going to do it because it's scary.
Yeah, I think slowing down the room is the number one thing, right? Especially if someone's panicking a little bit. I treat it the way I would a panic attack, right? I'm looking you in the eyes. We're taking deep breaths. I might be giving like some firm touch of like, you're safe, we're here, or even just explaining what's happening. Hey, it looks like the doctor is doing this and they were talking about this. How do you feel about that? Right? Kind of blocking out the rest of the craziness
The
and
noise.
focusing in. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, because looking at the postpartum side of it, when we have clients who are, high achieving women, they've got families and they've got careers and whatnot, and they're taking care of everybody but themselves, overlooking themselves, only to let themselves kind of be more anxious, be more frustrated, run themselves kind of into the ground. And I can see the parallels of y'all being in that situation with these women, and then us on the other side of saying, like, you have got to bring yourself back to you, because if you're not taking care of yourself, all of this noise is going to impact your perception of this environment, your relationships and whatnot. And so we've got to find the importance of like your value, but then also learn, again, going back to the mindset piece of this, of being able to how to calm back and calm myself and going into that parasympathetic state, as opposed to, because we see so many women, I'm sure y'all do too, of like, they're always got, like, they're on the go, there is no rest. Like, what's the next part of this birth? What's the next part of this labor? What's the next part? Okay, check box, instead of being like, why don't we just be present, focus on the breath, and then we can talk about where we're going from here, as opposed to not even registering where they're at in the labor phase too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where that knowledge of what labor looks like you were saying, your little cheat sheet, and we give something similar, is that some of these things, they're reminders of like, oh, well, transition is the shortest part of labor, but the hardest part of labor. So I'm like, when you say like, I can't do this anymore, I don't want to have this baby, right? Maybe it's a sign that your baby's really close, right? Because we hear that all the time, right?
Yeah.
So we hear that a lot of things similarly. So I'm like, even if there's just a tiny little voice in your head of like, I can't do this anymore, and that little voice says like, maybe you're closer than you think, is kind of helpful.
It goes back to y'all. The reason why you guys do what you do is the education piece, Yeah. So as we wrap up a little bit, what I want you two to say is, what is like the biggest piece of advice you would give to someone who's listening that is pregnant, trying to become pregnant, going to become pregnant, or just interested in working with this population? Like, I know it's a heavy cross to bear.
One,
or two, three, whatever. A foundational aspect that you find is almost kind of like your mantra for why you do this, or what is the biggest piece of advice you wish more people knew? Let's start with Alex.
Okay, so the biggest thing that I think that I want like people to know is going to be that you have way more control than you think, and you are allowed and absolutely should take that back, right? You should, as much as you can, educate yourself, walk into those spaces, ready to have those conversations, ready to ask those questions. If that's for birth, if that's for your child at the pediatrician, if that's for you as you get older, right? So I see it through everybody, not just pregnancy. Since becoming a doula, I'm like, oh, everybody needs a doula. Like,
Agreed.
My dad's at the doctor, just letting the doctor tell him whatever. And he's not asking any questions. He's not looking into any alternatives, right? So we have so much more power than we've been taught. And it is our responsibility now to take that back, right? So nobody's just going to be like, here's all your power back. You have to say, no, hi, I'm here. This is what I want. This is what's important. These are the questions I have. And like, you absolutely should take that back if you can.
Kaytlin?
Mine's kind of along the same lines, but figure out what you want out of your birth. Like, what do you want it to look like, feel like, your environment to be like? Figure out that first, and then find the people and build your support team who will help you get that in a supportive way. So that covers everything from finding the right class for you, Dare to Birth, hiring a doula if it's within your means, and then finding a provider who's actually going to respect what you want out of birth. Like take that control back. Say, I want to have this like really holistic, hands-off, low intervention birth. Okay, I need to find a midwife, probably out of hospital. but I feel a little weird about out of hospital. Okay, then I need to find the right midwife in hospital. And I'm going to get a doula because I want all these things and I know that I'm going to need to advocate for it. I'm also going to take a class because all of the information I'm going to learn in that class is only going to help me be more confident and more empowered to make decisions and ask for what I deserve in that space. So that's probably my biggest one, is like figure out what it is you want and make it happen by finding the right people to surround yourself with.
Make choices that align with that goal. Yeah. And then similar to Alex's, okay, I'm making those choices. I'm taking the control back of how I envision this going.
Yeah.
So now we've got let's talk a little bit about your birth class in one summary, because we've touched on it here and there throughout this episode. Can y'all give us a little synopsis of what it is, what it offers, ways that our listeners can maybe do it, whether they're in the area or they're not in the state of Arizona?
Yeah. So Dare to Birth was created to fill the gaps in childbirth education, right? Prepare families. They know their choices. They know how to advocate, right? So we focus a lot on advocacy. We offer either 4-week, like a 4-week series, 2.5 hours each week, or
in person or virtual?
In person.
Okay.
In the Phoenix area, all over the valley. We're also like slowly expanding. So we have someone in Tucson, we have someone in St. Louis.
Oh, wow.
But we also always have virtual classes as well. So virtual options. We also have private options as well. So we cover pregnancy. So the end of pregnancy, how to prepare for birth, and what it looks like. We talk about comfort measures. We talk about the interventions. We talk about all the things that you're going to need for birth. We also talk a lot about postpartum. How do we prepare for postpartum? How can we care for ourselves? How can we come back to ourselves, right? Like we were talking about. And then we cover all the newborn care, right? So how do we take care of a baby now that we've brought one home, right? Which can be sometimes the scariest part, especially for partners. They're like, you're going to tell me how to take care of this baby, right? Right? I hear it all the time, right? So we talk about newborn care and we talk about the basics of infant feeding.
Anything you want to add to that, Kaytlin? That I think she did a good job covering it.
Yeah, no, that's pretty great.
Let me ask this too, is when do you recommend someone take a birth education course? Is it their trimester, before they even got pregnant?
I say anywhere between 20 and 38 weeks.
Okay.
It's kind of my realm. Some people like to take a little bit earlier, digest it a little bit. Some people are taking, I had one of Kaytlin's clients actually in my class on her due date being like, hopefully I go into labor today. Sitting on the,
it's all fresh.
Right. So, which is, love that. I have no problems with that. The later you get in your pregnancy, the harder it might be to come to a 4-week, or, you might miss the class, right? But some people like to take it right at the end so that everything's fresh. Some people are the opposite and want to take it a little bit earlier. But we've had people even, take classes earlier than that. So it's kind of up to you, but we usually say 20 to 38 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then lastly, where can our listeners find y'all?
You can find us at daretobirth.com, which is our website. You can also find us at Instagram at daretobirth, or for myself, you can find me at Alex Barr Doula.
Yay. Kaytlin?
Cool. Yep. And then I am with Dare to Birth on Instagram, but also at Asher Birth and Body on Instagram, or asherbirthandbody.com. So that's where you can connect with me.
Great. All right. Well, Alex and Kaytlin, thank you for joining me today and sharing your wealth of information regarding all things birth. Be sure to check out the girls' Dare to Birth education course if you're interested. Is it a great, empowering course to give you the education to have the best birth you deserve? Be sure to also check out the Mindset of Mommies program, now open for March 3rd. 8-week course preparing you for birth on the physical, mental, and nutritional side of things. We are going to give you a crash course on how to modify during exercise during pregnancy, how to modify your nutrition standards during pregnancy, your mindset preparation for the changes that you're going to see in your body and your household with your partner during pregnancy. We're also going to talk about supportive roles such as birth education, doulas, postpartum support, pelvic floor physical therapy, all professionals that you can include in your birth experience and your pregnancy experience. We're also going to give you a wealth of resources. These resources are going to include different PDFs, different podcast episodes, all things to help you prepare for pregnancy. Not only that, you're going to get custom nutrition coaching from yours truly. Hello. There's also a 3-day-a-week exercise program for beginners and advanced, as well as pelvic floor
therapy movements to help prepare for birth. Not only that, we have weekly group calls every week. So you're going to meet me and the girls, and we're going to discuss that week's topic. And then you'll also have a forum that we can engage with each other throughout the week. Be sure to check out the link in the show notes for the Mindset of Mommy's program beginning March 3rd.